We have finally kicked off 2026. So today I'm going to be sitting down and ranking all 10 new releases that I played in 2025. Make sure to stick around to the very end of the video. The game that I have in the number 2 slot is actually a game that I haven't seen on anybody else's Game of the Year list. My name is James, and if this is your first time here, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel so that you can see more videos just like this one. Before I get started, I did want to mention real quick, Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour was actually the 11th game that I played last year. I decided not to include it here because it's really not much of a game and more of like a tech demo or interactive manual, but it would have been probably at number 11 on the list. But to be nice, I just decided not to include it, but then I talked about it anyway. Kicking things off at number 10, I have Madden 2026. This really isn't very surprising. I enjoy Madden. I play Madden pretty much every year to get excited in the NFL preseason for the coming NFL season. And so this year, Madden 2026 was pretty sufficient at getting me excited for the football season. So in that way, I had a lot of fun with it. The main reason that it lands at number 10 on this list is because I don't really feel like it did anything that Madden 2025 wasn't doing or really like capable of doing. Additionally, I don't really think it does anything so well that it would make me try to like convince somebody to play Madden. If you're not a Madden fan, this doesn't do anything to win you over. And so that's why it ends up at number 10. At number 9, I've got Sword of the Sea. And this one, I really didn't want to put this one so low. What I think the game does really well is that I think that the visual style is really nice, and I think it's fun to kind of sail all over the sand and kind of see the impact that you have on this world that feels pretty connected and really just kind of flowing around the open areas feels very good. The main thing differentiating this between number 9 and number 10 for me is that I think Sword of the Sea, if somebody was kind of on the fence about it, I would probably tell them like, yeah, no, you should definitely like go and check that out. I would probably try to like convince them a little bit, whereas I would definitely not do that with Madden. The main thing keeping it out of being higher up on the list for me is that it really didn't capture me the way that I wanted it to. And so in a way, Sword of the Sea was a little bit of a letdown for me. So that's why it lands at number 9. Coming in at number 8 is Wilmot Works It Out. This one is like a fun little puzzle game, and if you know me, you know that I really enjoy puzzle. I enjoy literal puzzles and then also puzzle games. And so what I enjoyed about this game was that you could kind of pick it up and play it whenever you wanted and put it down, and then you could come back to it and you could pretty much instantly know exactly what was going on, because really the entire scope of the game is just you kind of putting together these like digital jigsaw puzzles. The main thing that kind of keeps it out from being higher up on the list for me is that I don't think it's very great in like long stretches, that all of the levels are kind of the same, which is kind of something that I could also say about all of the games that I put lower than this as well. But I did enjoy it as a fun game to play during NFL games, or if I have like a few minutes to kill before I need to like go and do something. It's really great in small bursts. Coming in at number 7 is Avowed. And I'm not gonna pretend to be a huge like critic of role-playing games, because I'm not. But I can say what I really enjoyed about Avowed is that I thought it had really good combat, and it had surprisingly fun like traversal and almost like platforming that I found like jumping through windows and going from like rooftop to rooftop in the towns to be pretty fun. I also think that this is the first game that I've talked about that I could play for like long stretches without kind of feeling like I was doing the same thing over and over again. And so I think it was pretty noteworthy in that regard too, that's kind of what sets it apart from the games that are lower down on the list for me. What prevents it from being higher up on the list for me is that even when I was doing like every single extra objective and every single side quest, I was feeling kind of like underleveled. And I really don't enjoy that feeling of being kind of like underleveled. Another thing that kind of stunk for me was that I thought the opening area was really cool. Or like the first chunk of area that you get, like the first kind of like whole like town and surrounding like villages and stuff was really cool. And then you get to the second area and it feels like the game is kind of winding down. But then you play in that second area for like a while. And then you go to a third area and you're like, okay, cool, the game's going to end now. And it keeps going. And then you go to a fourth area and the game still doesn't end like right away. There's still like quite a bit of stuff to do in that fourth area. And so in a way, I think that the pacing was kind of poor and that the leveling was kind of poor. And that's why Avowed comes in at number 7. Up next, I've got Crime Scene Cleaner at number 6. And I guess what I enjoyed about this game was that it scratches a particular itch that's pretty similar to what you get from like House Flipper or a Power Wash Simulator or one of those. But I like that it has a little bit more diversified gameplay in that you're not just going in and cleaning everything. You're also like bagging up trash and solving some little puzzles and collecting evidence and kind of unraveling a story and disposing of bodies. And in that aspect, I thought the game was really fun. This game was a tiny bit repetitive in that you're kind of doing the same stuff at all of the different crime scenes. However, I felt like the different crime scenes were diversified enough and interesting enough that it really didn't feel like I was doing the exact same thing in every location. And the main thing probably keeping it from being higher up on the list for me is that this game is noticeably less polished than something like your Power Wash Simulator. And I also think that it's not quite as fun to like revisit levels, since my enjoyment of the game kind of came from like unraveling the story in each area. It's hard to kind of capture that feeling again. So kind of feeling like it's kind of like one and done is what puts it in the number 6 slot for me. Coming in at number 5 is Donkey Kong Bananza. What I think this game does really well is the digging mechanic. I think it's really cool. I think it's really interesting. I also think it's really funny that Donkey Kong is like, his profession is that he is a miner, I think, if I understood correctly. And as always with Nintendo games, you have lots of charm and it's very polished and very high quality from the very beginning. What kind of sours the experience for me is that the digging mechanic, I didn't really feel like they did enough later in the game to make it like continually interesting. And by the end of the game, I kind of felt like I had to force myself to get through it. And I wanted to play something else. Coming in at number 4 is Assassin's Creed Shadows. And I should mention right here, before I talk about the game, that I was provided a digital code for both PS5 and for Nintendo Switch 2 by Ubisoft for the game. But I did also buy the game physically on both PS5 and on Xbox. So what I think the game does really well is that I think it's a really good stealth game, and I think that the combat is pretty solid as well. As far as stealth, I think that this is the best stealth that we've seen in any Assassin's Creed game, which is probably one of the most important pillars of the series to me. But what keeps it out of the top 3 slots for me is that I feel like they really fumbled the story. As you may know, the story is kind of split between 2 different protagonists. One of them has a pretty interesting story, and you don't really spend a lot of time with that character and kind of figuring out their story, and it's kind of left open. And then the other character that you spend probably most of your time with has a really basic, generic story that just doesn't really hit. I also felt like the pacing and kind of the delivery of the world felt a little bit off. You play through Act 1, and stuff is and events are kind of moving the story forward a little bit. And then you get to Act 2, where you're basically told that you can go after, like, any of these, like, 7 targets. And it's really cool that you can do any of them, but it means that none of their stories are going to, like, be intertwined and connected. And so with probably like 80% of the game taking place in Act 2, the overall story feels like it comes to a halt for probably like 80% of the game. And I think that's a problem. And I would really like for them to get that figured out in the next Assassin's Creed. We're going to take a quick break real quick before I give my top 3, and I'm going to give you all of my honorable mentions in alphabetical order. These are games, some of them that I didn't even start, some of them that I started and didn't finish, but these are games that would definitely have been on this list if I had finished them. The Altars, Blue Prince, Clair Obscur Expedition 33, Chronos: The New Dawn, Death Stranding 2, Doom: The Dark Ages, Hell Is Us, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, Oblivion Remastered, The Outer Worlds 2, and Super Mario Galaxy 1+2. And I guess I should mention, I did finish Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, but I didn't want to include it on this list. I didn't really feel like they did enough to it to really treat it like a new game. Bringing us into the top 3, I've got Ghost of Yotei. And I guess what I could say positively is that I think that this game did everything well. And I don't think that there's a single thing in this entire game that they do worse than in the previous game in Ghost of Tsushima. I think that the combat feels a little bit better. I think the stealth is pretty much the same. I think the story and the writing is much, much, much better, which is really probably the big thing that separates it from Assassin's Creed Shadows for me, and which bumped it into this number 3 slot. But the main thing probably keeping it out of the top 2 for me is that overall it didn't really feel like a new experience, even if you can kind of point to all of these individual things and say like, oh, well, this is better than in the first game, and this is better than in the first game. The game as a whole just really didn't feel like a fresh experience, which is fine. Coming in at number 2 was a surprise pick here, the Rogue Prince of Persia. This is a game that I had actually never even heard about before it came out. It's a roguelike, and what I think this game does really well is the combat and the really good platforming. I really like in the 2D setting being able to kind of run along that back wall. I've never really seen a 2D game do something like that before, so I found that to be really interesting. Another thing that I really like about the game is that it is a roguelike, which apparently is becoming one of my favorite things, because it seems like I'm talking about a roguelike being one of my favorite games like every single year. But one thing I liked about this roguelike in particular is that I felt like there were multiple viable builds for trying to beat the game as effectively as possible. In a lot of roguelikes, I don't think that... I feel like there's a lot of times a clear and obvious, like, okay, if you want to win, like, this is what you need to do. And I didn't really feel that way in the Rogue Prince of Persia. It seemed like the different like items and alternatives that you were presented with were actually like a lot more like competitive, and they had much higher strengths and much sharper like trade-offs as well. And so all of that are things that I really liked about the game. What keeps it out of the top slot for me is that I think that the level cap is a little bit too low. I would have liked to have gotten to a point where I felt like I was like pretty powerful or like almost like overpowered. And I felt like I think the level cap is like 15. I think if the level cap had been 20, I would have probably been able to get to that point. Another thing that I'm not too hot on is that with there being so many different items and charms and upgrades and stuff in the game, the only way to really know what you like is by unlocking stuff. But then once you unlock something, it's kind of like in the pool, and there's going to be a lot of weapons and a lot of charms that just don't really jive with you. So you're going to be stuck with a lot of I guess I don't really have a better way to say it than you're going to be stuck with a lot of garbage that you don't want showing up in your runs. And so I almost feel like you're better off starting the game and kind of figuring out what weapons you like, and then starting the game over and then like only unlocking those weapons. But I feel like that's really not how the game was intended to be played. And so that's really the big thing that kind of keeps it out of the number one slot for me. And finally, my number one game of the year. And if you've kept up with my channel, it should be no surprise to you that is Metroid Prime 4. This game really captured me. I really liked the much more modern look and feel for a Metroid Prime game, since the last Metroid Prime game was on the Wii in 2007. And I also do feel like the atmosphere and the tone were in line with other Metroid Prime games. I did a full review of the game where I go all into the negatives. But as for the context of this video, this is the only game that I played this year where I wanted to play for like days on end without stopping. And that's why it comes in at number one. Guys, that is all that I have for today. In the comment section, please let me know what your favorite games from 2025 were. And until next time, the best way to keep up with me is right here on YouTube and on Instagram at James_Solar. Thanks, guys.